One of the most controversial characters in the Edgewater universe is Luke Leone. Oftentimes, when people say the word controversial, they really mean hated, but if you want to look at the most hated characters in the Edgewater universe, look at Vince or Gabriella before their characters were written out in Season 4. You see, when I say controversial, I mean someone that people have a lot of opinions about, and Luke is definitely one of those. I mean, no one seemed to care when he showed back up in Edgewater in Fire Country Season 4, but also I suppose they were like knee-deep in Bodiella stuff, so we can kind of forgive that. Don't worry though, my informal Fire Country book club at work is full of people with lots of opinions, and we had a great discussion. People generally fall into two camps when talking about Luke. On the one hand, you have the people calling him a traitor to his entire family. On the other hand, you have Screen Rant, who is writing articles about how Luke is 100% correct for trying to close 3 Rock. If you're wondering where Michael Trucco sits, he said in an article written by Dateline 2 years ago that he sees Luke as a ball of chaos. He's never quite sure what the guy is gonna do. Usually when I'm thinking about what a character is like, I consider how the actor thinks about them, but since Michael Trucco said he's never quite sure how to interpret the guy, that means I can interpret him however the fuck I want. And how I want to interpret him is as a guy who does caregiving tasks for his entire family, but also who snaps the second he isn't feeling appreciated enough. Really though, that second one is going to be the subject of Luke's Part 2 essay. You can't really talk about how the guy blows up without talking about his jealousy. You can't talk about his jealousy without talking about his relationship with Sharon. And that really needs to be looked at in the context of all 3.5 seasons that we have so far. So instead, this essay is going to be about the caregiving aspects of Luke's character. With the exception of my work friends who have seen my Vince video, and now all of you, I suppose, I don't think many of us think of Luke as being the family caregiver, which is kind of interesting because that's basically exactly how he's presented in Get Some Be Safe and Like Old Times, which are his first outings on the show. The first time we meet Luke is out at 3 Rock. He's planning to take the work that Manny has done at the camp to display what a well-run con camp looks like. There is also the benefit that he gets to see his beloved nephew Bodhi. It's heavily implied throughout the series that the two were close before Bodhi was forced to leave. And during Luke's visit with Bodhi, he promises his nephew that he'll get him a job with Cal Fire as soon as Bodhi is out of prison. A few scenes later, at Smokey's, Luke shows up to chat with Sharon about life. The two are planning to build a new conservation camp, and Luke wants to do some working on the numbers. Sharon says that she doesn't have time to chat about work, but he can come over for dinner. She also warns him against joking about his and Vince's sibling rivalry-related bad behavior after he jokes about how he ruins Vince's holiday cooking in revenge for Vince locking him in the basement when they were kids. We do have a scene with Luke and Manny, but I'll cover that in Luke's Part 2 essay. The next time we see Luke is towards the end of Like Old Times. He's eating lunch and chatting with Vince when Sharon storms in, furious, because someone reported her kidney disease to their bosses. The plan had evidently been for Sharon and Vince to take days off for Sharon's dialysis treatments, but Vince thinks that Sharon doing what they think caused her kidney disease while actively on dialysis is a bad idea. And regardless of my personal questions about if work really did cause her kidney disease, I have to agree that doing a job that worsens kidney disease is not good for someone on dialysis. Regardless, she is pretty pissed because she feels like Luke turned her in just to snake her job. Vince asks her to calm down and she storms out. A few scenes later, we see Luke at the bar of Smokey's having a beer when Vince comes in to join him. Vince reveals that he was the one who told Cal Fire that Sharon was too sick to work. When Vince questions Luke on why he took the fall, Luke said that's what family does. Not unlike how Vince turning in Sharon's illness is also taking care of her. Sharon needed someone in her corner, and she needed someone to be mad at for turning her into Cal Fire. Luke decided to be the second so that Vince could keep being the first. They have to take care of each other. Vince says that this isn't Luke's normal behavior, but the next time Sharon sees Luke during Bad Guy, she says that Luke is always taking hits for the family, so it seems like Vince's statement is just something we can throw out. And I'm not just throwing out Vince's statements just because Vince is saying them. I think that's a horribly ableist thing to do. I'm throwing out Vince's statement that Luke has never done anything selfless for the family because of what we see right here with our own 2 eyes in Luke's first 2 episodes. Yes, he is also trying to uncover how Sharon managed to pressure Manny into keeping Bodhi at 3 Rock. But Bad Guy makes it pretty clear that he's trying to show Sharon that she needs him to help her cover up her bad deed. When that fails, we get the scene on the couch and his affair attempt. Really, I can't blame anyone, including myself the first couple of times I watched the show, for not spotting Luke's behavior as caregiving. After all, it isn't long after we are introduced to Luke that we get Vince's little spiel about how some people chase titles and others are hard workers. We don't see Luke in turnouts until the episode My Team, his 13th appearance in the series. The only time he actually works in season 1 is his first scene when he's having photos taken at 3 Rock. Vince isn't the only one questioning Luke's behaviors. When Luke is conducting his little investigation at 3 Rock, he meets Manny at Smokey's to ask why Bodhi was allowed to stay at 3 Rock after he punched Jake. During this conversation, Manny asserts that Luke is trying to steal Sharon's job. Luke denies it, but nonetheless, Manny tells Luke to back off. Likewise, when Sharon yells at Luke for turning her into Cal Fire, she accuses him of trying to snake her job. Vince's accusation that Luke is trying to show Vince up, though, that one might actually be true. It would be incredibly unfair to Vince if I pretended like all the sibling rivalry was one way. In Get Some Be Safe, Luke calls Vince a bad husband because he and Sharon haven't taken a vacation together, though we learned one episode earlier that they have been waiting for the right time to buy an Airstream. Luke promises to get Bodhi a job at Cal Fire only minutes after talking about how Vince doesn't treat Bodhi well. Skipping ahead to season 3 in My Team, Luke knows that Bodhi is having a rough time and could have told Vince, but he doesn't. Luke is engaging in the same kind of undermining that Walter does to Vince. But Get Some Be Safe and Like Old Times aren't Luke's only episodes in the first 2 arcs of season 1. He also does a substantial number of things in Bad Guy and Mama Bear. Like I've said before, I'm moving all of the Luke and Sharon stuff into their joint video, and that's what most of the stuff in those episodes is. But I want to look at the flashbacks from Bad Guy one more time, but this time from Luke's perspective. I recognize that this is the 3rd video where I've talked about those flashbacks, and hopefully this is the end of that until I write my essay on Edgewater. But just like how I needed to recontextualize Vince's behavior in the flashbacks, I also need to recontextualize Luke's behavior from his perspective. If you listen to my video on Vince, you know that I think Vince is intended to have PTSD. What I didn't get around to in that video, because I thought it would work better here, is that the night Riley died, Vince's mental health was at an absolute crisis point. His behavior across all 3 scenes suggests that Vince's mental health is so bad that he should have been evaluated for hospitalization. When I first realized this, I wondered why Luke didn't do anything to that end, but I think what Luke does in the I Hate Him scene shows that he saw exactly what I was seeing. When we see him turn away from Vince in the I Hate Him scene, I think that is him trying to decide what to do about it. It can be quite a stretch to declare a behavior normal or not normal on TV, since by definition, TV behaviors almost always are a little bit exaggerated. That being said, the episode Bad Guy itself tells us that Vince's behavior is not normal. We see Sam and Yada's parents running into the accident, same as Vince, but they're able to be stopped without having to be physically restrained in the same way Vince was. We see the dad blame himself for not making the kids ride in the car with him, same as Vince, but he's not nearly as inconsolable as Vince was. Finally, we see in the next episode, No Good Deed, that Meg's parents want the person responsible for Meg's death punished, but they're able to be calmed when Vince explains that Meg died because she made a mistake, and that punishing Bodhi when he didn't make a mistake might put other people in danger. So, based on these comparisons, I don't think we're supposed to see Vince's behavior as normal. We're supposed to read it as a heightened state, but just because it's a heightened state doesn't mean that he needs to be hospitalized. There are laws about this sort of thing, and just like how I did in my Vince Was Murdered and Vince Part 1 videos, I want to look at California's laws regarding involuntary hospitalization, how they might have applied to Vince's behavior, and what Luke may have been thinking when he decided to leave Vince at home. Okay, really quick, before I get into my legal analysis, I must again repeat my standard disclaimer that I put in any time that I am doing a video that requires medical or legal analysis. I am not a doctor or a lawyer. I was a journalist, and I have been on many different sides of the mental health field. In addition, thanks to a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, I am a certified mental health first aider, or at least I am until May of 2027. This is not a definitive look at what would make someone eligible to be committed in the state of California. This is how I, as a writer, would read the standards, look at Vince's behavior, and see how they applied. California, the laws that govern involuntary mental health commitment are called the Welfare and Institution Codes, and specifically Code 5150. The law was last amended in 2024, so we're going to use this version. What I want to look at here is specifically the first paragraph in the law and paragraph 5150.05, which describe the scenarios in which a peace officer, not a firefighter, can take someone into mental health custody. That part is important because it means that it isn't enough for Luke to see these signs in his brother. He has to believe that he has enough evidence to convince a sheriff's deputy that he is right. The standard an officer must follow for a person to be committed to a mental health unit against their will is that they must be a danger to themselves or others due to a mental health condition. If someone who has the legal authority to make this call, and there is quite a list, but firefighter is not on that list, thinks that this is the case, then the person can be taken for a 72-hour observation period. If the person needs more than that, then the facility has to take them to court. This 72-hour period is clock hours, and it usually also includes weekends and holidays, but not always. Since Luke can't write the affidavit himself, the analysis isn't just does Vince's behavior meet this criteria, but instead it is, does Luke see enough things to convince someone else that Vince is unsafe to stay in his home? So we're going to have to throw out any scenes that Luke doesn't see. But there is another piece to this analysis that we're going to have to add when deciding if Luke made the wrong call, and that's the existence of cool-off laws. Cool-off laws basically say that if a cop is called out on a domestic disturbance and there is suspicion to believe something did happen, someone has to go to jail. That doesn't mean that charges have to be filed per se, but it does mean that there is a length of time that someone has to stay in jail. This is really the only explanation for how Vince and Liam ended up in jail during See You Next Apocalypse, since they're back at work the next day. If this had just been a fight, it would have been disorderly conduct, but since Sharon was there, that technically makes this a domestic dispute, and thus a situation where cool-off laws would be triggered. Technically, stays under the cool-off law are supposed to be 48 hours, according to California law, but show logic trumps actual law, so let's pretend the law actually just says until the next morning. As we move into looking at Vince's behavior from Luke's perspective, let's keep in mind that Vince attacking Bodhi most certainly qualifies as domestic violence, so if Luke summons the sheriff, and the sheriff's office agrees that Vince is in a mental health crisis, he goes to the hospital. If they disagree, then Vince goes to jail. Also, while you and I have walked through the diagnostic criteria to see that Vince has PTSD, and that's something that might swing facts in favor of this being a mental health crisis, not a reason to take Vince to jail, this is never diagnosed in universe, so this isn't something that Luke could use as a piece of evidence while he's trying to convince a sheriff's deputy that Vince needs to go to the hospital. When Luke first sees Vince that night, he is trying to run into the scene of a fire in street clothes. Luke does try to stop Vince with a quick "hey no," but he switches to holding Vince back. Then Vince stops fighting and collapses on the ground crying. But it is also the immediate reaction of seeing his child's car on fire and maybe seeing Riley's dead body. This may not have made someone comfortable going, "Chief Leone is screaming while his child is dead. Let's send him to a mental hospital instead of home to be with his wife." Also, there are lots of first responders on the scene, and we know no one took a step in that direction. Vince does not attack or even acknowledge Bodhi, so there's no indication in this scene that Vince is a danger to Bodhi. That's not to say we throw this scene out entirely. That's just to say that this is a single data point, not definitive proof that Vince is a danger to himself or others because of mental health problems. Now let's move on to the attack scene. And I call this scene the attack scene for a reason. When Luke walks in, Sharon and Vince are on their feet. Vince starts asking Bodhi what happened. Sharon is quick to tell Vince to stop attacking verbally, and when Vince escalates into a full attack, she is quick to try to break it up. Luke is the one who actually does though, and Luke starts restraining Vince. Instead of just struggling to get free, Vince hits his brother while he screams, and it seems like Sharon takes Bodhi upstairs. So this is it. This is the evidence, right? Well, not quite. Not all emotional outbursts on the night that a loved one dies are due to a mental health emergency severe enough that a mental health intervention is needed. Luke may have had the data points to say Vince is a danger to Bodhi, but proving that this is a mental health emergency, not just someone acting out violently after a loved one died, is something he would still have to do. I think that this is what Luke is actually doing in the I Hate Him scene. Now, I know that in Riley's essay, I described this scene as Luke letting Vince get all of his emotions out so he doesn't explode. And I think that for a 24-year-old Bodhi who has lived a lifetime of a dad exploding and doing things that make Bodhi feel unloved, this is a fair assessment. But when I put my mental health first aider hat on, this really seems like Luke is trying to assess what to do about Vince. What Luke hears out of Vince's mouth isn't he hates Bodhi, but he is blaming himself, which is really the more accurate read on it. Vince isn't just blaming himself, he turns his anger on Luke pretty quickly before collapsing back down into, she's really gone, huh? So where does that leave us? And the answer is probably not enough information to prove that Vince is a danger to himself or others. We don't know exactly what Luke was thinking, but Vince's statements about hating himself might read as remorse for attacking Bodhi. His falling on the ground was an immediate reaction to his daughter's accidental health, not necessarily a mental health crisis warranting hospitalization. In the main rescue in Bad Guy, Vince promises that he's going to stay with Sam and Yara's parents for as long as it takes. I think this is Vince reflecting on the night Riley died and saying that Luke left him alone too soon, which is why he was able to act out and drive Bodhi away. But all things considered, I don't think that's a fair take. Part of that is because Vince saw and experienced things that Luke didn't see. In the attack scene alone, Luke misses like half of what's going on because he isn't in the room or because his back is turned. When we move over to the I Hate Him scene, we again get another few seconds where Luke's back is turned. All these put together are some really telling moments. The first 20 seconds of the attack scene, we see Vince on the floor with Sharon. They're both crying, but Vince is saying that what happened to Riley is his fault. This isn't something that he starts saying after he attacks Bodhi. It's seemingly something he believes up until the moment he attacked Bodhi, and probably went back to believing it until Bodhi came downstairs. And while I'm not justifying what Vince did, I can see how going from pouring your mental health crisis thoughts out to your brother to looking up and seeing your kid standing right there listening might cause a real swing in your perception. And that's even without going into Sharon's behavior. It's important to point out before I go over this that Sharon just lost her child. There is no right way to react to that. But if you think of Vince as being someone who needs someone to take care of him that night and make sure he doesn't hurt himself or anybody else, well, she's not really capable of that right now. When he's sitting on the floor crying, she doesn't say anything to disrupt his thoughts that it's his fault Riley died. She does grab on his face, but she's too upset to say anything. Yes, she does go upstairs with Bodhi, but she didn't take him upstairs. If anything, he seems to be the one taking her upstairs. Then later, when Bodhi comes downstairs, he's alone. We know Sharon didn't know what happened to Bodhi when Vince sent him away, but again, that's still pretty strong evidence to suggest that she just wasn't able to manage the situation that night because she was too lost in her grief. And when you combine the rest of Vince's behavior with Sharon's inability to do anything except grieve, What you have is a man with PTSD in a full mental health spiral who needed somebody to take care of him. He shouldn't have been left alone with Bodhi and Sharon. Luke should have seen that. But also, in Luke's defense, they still had a fire station to run. He couldn't just sit there managing his brother's potential outbursts. He had to go back to work and take care of other families in Edgewater who needed them. But I can see how, from Vince's perspective, what Luke did felt like abandoning him when he needed help. I can't help but wonder if part of Vince's anger towards his brother in the first few episodes of season 1 is that he feels like if Luke had done something, then Bodhi wouldn't have been driven out or gone to prison. But painting Luke as someone who is selfish and never does anything for the family is entirely unfair. There's just a lot more nuance than that. And now we're at the time of the video where I transition into my next essay topic. So for what my video on Sharon is actually going to be about, because I just promised no more essays on those 3 minutes of flashbacks until I talk about the Edgewater essay, I want to talk about how just insanely naive Sharon is, and also how Manny seems to constantly benefit from her naivete.